So Joy is in the waiting room. Should I bring her in? Are you ready?
Yes, I think we are.
Hello, Joy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Yeah, I've made you co-host so that you can be able to do or like unmute yourself and be able, yeah. But I'm Grace Bavidi. I'm a program coordinator with MCN, and I'll be helping with the technical bit of the webinar. But we shall also be having one of the fellows join us as a moderator. And the rest of the team members that you're seeing right now is James. I believe you've been able to interact with James before. And I'll let yeah. And I'll let Anna, Adrija, and Christine introduce themselves. Then we shall get to meet you formally. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you. Hi, Joy. It's really nice to have you here and for you to make the space to talk with all of the fellows. My name is Ana Diaz. I'm a program coordinator as well with the rest of the team that is here, and I'll be helping out with the webinar as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Joy. So nice to meet you. I'm Adrija Dash, and I'm also a program coordinator. And thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited for this session, and I will pass it on to Chris.
Thanks, Adrija. So I'm Christine. Now I'm tuning in from Taipei, so it's 1 a.m. on my end. But we are very, very glad to have you here today. And we have quite a few fellows who also have tuned in, especially coming in from all sorts of time zones as well. So yes, glad to have you here once again, and I look forward to your webinar.
Taipei is a wonderful city. So.
Hi, Joy.
Thank you,
Sorry, hi, Joy. Just briefly, it's James here. I'm sorry I can't join you on video, but it's I'm actually just started my leave, but so pleased to be able to put a face to the name and very excited for this session. Thank you so much for making time.
Of course.
Thank you, team. I'll let Queen Asha also talk about herself because she's going to be the moderator for the webinar.
Hello, hi, how are you? This is Kwanisha. I'm from Ashoka University, and I'm also one of the Millennium Fellows. I'm the campus director from my university. I've been working on neurodegenerative disorders and spreading awareness about the same, and I'm really excited to moderate in the session. Grace, may I begin with the introduction?
Yeah, so I will start sharing my screen as people join. Then after I stop sharing, you take it on.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Okay, is everyone feeling good? We can start letting people in the room. Cool. I'll just shortly share my screen and we will start. Kinasha, you're muted.
Yeah, I can unmute myself now. Perfect. Thank you. Hello everyone. I'm Kwanasha, and I really welcome all of the participants to show up today. It's really glad to have you all, and it's lovely to see a couple of faces today. I would like to begin with talking about today's speaker. Joy is the former Chief Data Officer of the state of California, where she was appointed to improve government use of data. And prior to her state role, she was responsible for scaling internal systems, data, and information security at Coalight, a high growth cybersecurity startup funded by Accel and General Catalyst. Prior to Coalight, she served as the first chief data officer for the city and county of San Francisco, where she pioneered multiple initiatives to streamline data access, improve data management and governance, and boost capacity to use data through training and data science. Before that, she developed technology, cyber, and privacy policy across the Department of Energy's National Laboratory System. Her career started in New Orleans with 7 years designing and managing the development of information systems to support planning and decision making for local governments and nonprofits. She's also earned her master's degree from UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy and her bachelor's in mathematics and philosophy from Tulane University. She spent her career working at the nexus of data, technology, design, and policy. We are really, really grateful to have you here and speak to everyone today. All of the participants and all the team that has all worked for this webinar, we're all really glad that you've taken time out from your busy schedule to be able to address all our fellows. So I would like to invite you to please go ahead with your keynote remarks.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I appreciate it. I also see a hand up. I don't know if Samuel has a hand up. Are we going to handle that now or no? Okay. Oh, there's 2 hands up.
Yeah, we shall handle them later. You can have the opening remarks now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have a chance to connect with you all. I actually remember my time at the stage that you all were at. I was asked to sort of speak about my early career and how I got started. And so I thought I'd start back when I was 14 and my first memorable experience of the public sector, which was not a positive one. So I was 14 years old and my paycheck had just arrived in the mail. And yes, it was a paper paycheck because that's what we had back then. And I was running up the stairs of my house and I was tearing open the envelope because I'd already spent the money in my head. And but when I opened up the envelope and looked at the paycheck, the amount was not the amount that I had calculated and expected based on all my hours of work. And this was essentially my first exposure to taxes. The taxes had taken a big hunk out of my paycheck. And for context, I grew up in a very conservative family in the Midwest area of the United States. And it would be many years before I heard terms like public goods, infrastructure, basic science research. Instead, the message I received from my family was that, yeah, that's government stealing your hard-earned cash. So I bought into this ethos initially, but I was a reader and I loved to read books and I kept on reading more and more theories about the world and what made it right and wrong. But it was really 2 key experiences I had in college, essentially where you all are right now, where my social justice bug started to blossom. And the first was really an intellectual experience. So I studied mathematics and philosophy as an undergrad. And at some point in my undergraduate readings in philosophy, we read John Rawls, which I don't know how many folks have read John Rawls, but he's known for this concept called the veil of ignorance. And the veil of ignorance, to sort of loosely paraphrase, is the idea that the measure of a just society is one in which you're willing to be born into any part of it. And this is a really great thought exercise for all of us to think about as we try to measure what a just society is. And I had been born into a middle-class, very white Midwestern town in the US. And that was sort of the circumstances that I was born into. But at the same time that I was digesting these theories of justice, I was also having a very lived experience. In my senior year of undergraduate, I was living in New Orleans. That's where I went to school. But I had escaped the sort of campus bubble, and I was living away from campus inside an actual neighborhood and community in New Orleans. And that's when I started to see, one, both real poverty and racial segregation. And I started to become aware at that time of my relative privilege and started to see my life to date as less a series of hard work and accomplishments and more a product of my upbringing. I really had never questioned, will I go to college? It was just a matter of which school to go to. And so having this lived experience where I saw very different outcomes, very different experiences growing up, it started to teach me that maybe I was just lucky to have been born into a set of circumstances. And so while this social justice awareness was starting to blossom, I didn't really honestly have a plan to act on it. I was just sort of intellectually thinking about it and aware of it. And for context, for those of you who are not in the US, at least when I was an undergrad, it often feels like you have 3 career options. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, or go on to grad school. Those seem to be like your main options as an undergrad. And it makes the world seem sort of small in terms of what's out there. And the reality is there's many, many options out there. So while I had no idea what I wanted to do, even up to my senior year of college, my senior math seminar sort of gave me a glimpse of the grad school route. And so the context was, as part of this class, every week we would read a paper, and then someone would come and give a lecture on that paper, and we would talk and discuss about it. So to be perfectly honest, I did not enjoy the seminar. I did not enjoy reading the papers, and I certainly didn't enjoy what I perceived to be the very dry lectures, until one. So one week, a woman came in, and her job was to give a lecture for us. But she wasn't an academic. She wasn't even a math person, even though it was the mathematics of Photoshop. And her talk on the mathematics of Photoshop, it was interesting, but it was fun and dynamic. And I was immediately drawn to her. And she told us a little bit about her organization. And it sounded interesting. And I was job hunting. And I was job hunting in a year that was a recession. So to be perfectly honest, there weren't a lot of opportunities out there. So first pro tip, if you can avoid graduating during a recession, please do so. But I was job hunting. It was second semester, senior year. And so I went up to her afterwards and I asked her more about the organization and expressed my interest. And that led to an internship that ultimately ended up turning into a full-time role that I went on to hold for 7 years. And that organization was something called the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center. And I would say that experience really career imprinted me. A lot of times your first few roles out of undergrad, they'll imprint your career in a way, kind of like a little duckling following mama duck. And that organization had a theory of change for what we did. And basically a theory of change is a theory about why your work matters. Like, so as an organization, we do certain activities with certain resources and we have certain outcomes, but what are the ultimate outcomes that we want to achieve? And so our theory went a little bit like this. So essentially our theory was that if all the nonprofits in New Orleans had better access to data and evidence in the capacity to use data and evidence as well as technology well, then they'll be able to design and deliver better services, which will in turn improve the life outcomes of residents. So data and evidence plus good use of data and evidence, better services, better outcomes for the people we care about. And I really bought into this theory, and I still do, with some interesting wrinkles, but and it very much shaped and has shaped my career to date and my own sort of personal theory of career change. I had one issue with it, though. We were very, very focused on the nonprofit sector in New Orleans, and in New Orleans at the time there was over 4,000 nonprofit organizations. But I kept coming back to the role of government, because I saw government as not only the biggest funder in New Orleans, but the biggest service provider, right? From cleaning the streets to teaching kids, right? Like, the local government was a much bigger service provider than the many smaller nonprofits. And this question really led me to explore, government and policy work. And as early as, as early as 2003, I decided I wanted to get a graduate degree in public policy. Definitely not mathematics, right? But with a focus on using data and evidence and technology for better work. But it took another 6 years to get there, and that's a whole nother story that I won't fully go into. But what I want to talk about is during my time at the data center in New Orleans, that's where I really saw what a difference data and evidence, but also technology can make to doing good in this world. And it starts with a storm. So in late July 2005, I had finally actually decided to move to San Diego away from New Orleans to join my fiance, who was in grad school in San Diego. But the data center who I was working with, they wanted me to finish up a few projects with them while I hunted for my next job. And so when I drove across the country from New Orleans to California, I brought my big beefy computer with because I did a lot of data and mapping work for the data center. And so I set up my home office and I started to work in August in San Diego. But a few weeks later, we started to track a storm in the Gulf of Mexico. So when you live in hurricane territory, you become a storm watcher. Like you really watch the weather news, you find out what's going on. And in New Orleans, for context, hadn't really been hit with a major hurricane in many years. But as the month was coming to close, this was August, our team got together and we started to think about what could we do in terms of data to help if something happens with the hurricane. And we never expected what happened was going to happen. But on Saturday, before Hurricane Katrina landed, my colleagues were actually all getting ready to evacuate because they had to leave the city. And the city actually, by Sunday, fell under a mandatory evacuation order. So we all met on Saturday and we're like, what could we do? Well, the storm, maybe it'll hit, maybe it won't hit, but maybe there's something we can do to prepare on the data side. And the conversation we had was like, well, maybe we should have an elevation map. So in case like the storm hits, we'll understand where flooding might be bad, right? And New Orleans is shaped like a bowl. And around that bowl are levees. And these are essentially walls or mounds of dirt that are designed to keep out floodwaters. So I was with my big computer in San Diego and I made a map of the elevation of New Orleans. And we posted it on our website. And again, another piece of context, our website had details about every single neighborhood in New Orleans, all the community. We had a special community public health survey. We had a bunch of census data, which was essentially demographic data about every household by neighborhood. And we had histories and profiles of every single neighborhood in New Orleans. And there were 73 neighborhoods. So I added this, while my colleagues were evacuating, I posted this elevation map with an overlay of the neighborhoods of New Orleans. And so we posted it. So Hurricane Katrina landed Monday morning. And at first, everyone was kind of like, maybe we missed the worst. Maybe we're going to be okay. Maybe New Orleans, escaped the wrath of the hurricane beast yet again. But then something started to happen, which that bowl shape with those levees around it, some of those levees started to break. And then they collapsed more or less completely, and catastrophic floodwaters ended up emptying into that bowl that was protected by the levees. Well, the levees failed, and New Orleans quickly found most of New Orleans was underwater. It was devastating. Still to this day, thinking about those moments, those hours when, the city that I loved was falling underwater and the people who were still stuck there and were unable to evacuate. It was catastrophic. And immediately, you can imagine the news cycle, everyone was swarming in. and trying to understand what was happening in New Orleans and in New Orleans communities and neighborhoods. And this is where things got extra interesting, because our website had all these details about every single neighborhood in New Orleans. And guess what? It was still up. So this is 2005. This is long before cloud computing, right? Almost every news website, every local government website their servers were flooded, right? They hosted their websites in the basements and in their buildings in New Orleans. There was no electricity, there was floodwaters everywhere. We were the one comprehensive website about New Orleans that was up. And the reason why is because our servers were in Kentucky for reasons that had nothing to do with storm prevention. They just happened to be in Kentucky. So what this meant was that every news organization from all over the world started to come to our website. And our executive director ended up being on CNN on, I believe it was Wednesday morning. The amount of web traffic and questions that came in just skyrocketed. So my little map ended up getting published by Bloomberg's news network and was distributed all over the world. Turns out there was a data error in it, which we can talk about in Q&A. Not that it's that important, but the long story short is we became this, center for data, both about the immediate data and evidence about Katrina's impact, but then we ended up tracking New Orleans recovery for the next decade. And that's a whole nother story that I have old slide decks on. But what this experience showed me was the power of data and evidence to really shape public decisions and choices. And that, as I mentioned earlier, has been a theme of my career. So I'll close this part with some words of advice that I was asked to provide to you. And I want to sort of segment it into professional and personal. So professional, a couple years ago, I had an undergrad intern working for me, and she was brilliant. She was so smart and clever and ambitious. And she was very much stressed out because she had multiple job offers, which if you're in a position to have multiple job offers, that's always great. And she was really strained about, oh, should I do this one or this one? And so the advice I gave her that helped her ease the pain of this choice was like, your job right now is to pick a horizon, not a door. Because there's so many options out there. If you generally pick a job that's going in generally the right direction, you're going to be fine. And the reality is you're probably going to have not only multiple jobs in your career, you're going to have possibly multiple careers. So don't obsess about each door, and more pick the direction where you get to explore, learn, and grow. The next sort of professional tip is comes from a interview question that some of my grad school friends got when they were applying to a program, and it was something around the question of the 3 Ps, and the 3 Ps work like this: people, process, and purpose. And the question was, what are the relative slices of a pie of your 3 Ps? And it's better to unpack this by way of my own way of how I would answer this. So earlier in my career, I was very, I would say, almost religious about purpose. Like there are only certain kinds of like purpose in the work and job that I was willing to undertake. That's loosened over time. I've learned that there's many valid purposes in my work. And so your P shapes can change over time. But pay attention to purpose and how that might change for you over time. And the next P is people, right? So when I was earlier in my career, I used to pride myself on like, oh, I can work with any jerk out there. Like, I don't care. As long as the work is the work, I will work with whoever I need to make it happen. Honestly, this has changed. I'm now at a point in my career in life where like the people I work with are more important than they used to be, because good people help you become your best. And I've learned that. And I've learned it's not enough just to tolerate someone. It's best to like, for me to flourish in the people I partner with. The last P, process, is really, what does your day-to-day look like? And earlier in my career, I did a lot of analyst work. So I sat in front of a computer with like spreadsheets and analytical tools, or did research and writing. And so it was a lot of like me on my own in front of a computer work. But when I was leaving grad school, I was like, you know what? I've been doing that kind of work a lot for the first 7 years. I don't want to do that work anymore. I actually like meetings, if they're well done, that is. And so the day-to-day part of your work can often affect your happiness in your job much more than people might expect. So some people might be happy, digging ditches. That's their day-to-day process, but they love the purpose and the people. I would never be happy digging ditches all day. It's just not how I like to spend my day-to-day. So pay attention to these 3 Ps as you pick your roles. The last sort of professional advice I'll give is do not live up to your income. You all are probably pretty ambitious, smart, given the program that you're in, but never live up to your income. If you can stay underneath your income, you'll have more flexibility when interesting opportunities come your way. I have multiple times in my life taken a pretty substantial pay cut for a more interesting job full of more opportunities, and it's because I've lived by that maxim. The last set of pieces of advice I'll give are more personal. 1, get enough sleep. I'm married to a neuroscientist. You want to get enough sleep. Just please take care of your sleep. The second is really around outside of work, make sure you cultivate multiple communities, right? You don't want just a work community, just your work family, right? It's very important to have multiple communities, whether you're interested in art or music or a sport or just your neighborhood, getting to know your neighbors. It's just very important to have those communities because they can serve as not just generally good for your well-being, but also a way of stepping aside from work and the sort of strain of your career. Which leads me to my last career tip or personal tip, which is develop a set of perspective setting activities. So sometimes we get so caught up in our own narratives and our own career and our own choices that it's good to step back and really put things in place. That for you, that might be travel, seeing different ways of living. For me, I have a variety of things I do, but I'll just share one, which is I have a little visualization I do where I float above my, body. I see my body in my room and then my house or whatever building I'm in, and then the street and then the neighborhood and then the town and then the state and then the country and then the world and then the universe, the solar system. And it just reminds you like we can all do an amazing work and contribute to good things, but we're also just specks of dust in the larger universe. So bring that perspective to just, help with your own mental health and insanity as many of you take on what are often very challenging, doing impact in public work and change work. It's hard work, and it's helpful just to also remember to keep that perspective and have some levity and fun in it as well. With that, I think I will stop talking and it's time to open it up for everyone else.
Yeah, before we open the stage to questions from the audience, I had a few questions for you. But before that, I had really pressing comments to make. Hearing whatever you said just made me so happy because I'm this person. So you mentioned about how we should look at the horizon, not the door. I'm usually this person who focuses on, I'm like the jack of all trades, but the master of none. So I like to do a lot of things. I don't like to stick to one field. So just hearing this from you made me feel feel validated in a way that wherever I'm going is fine. And the way you ended about how we should see the road, we should see our house, and then the whole world that we live in. I think that also related to how I usually think of going from short-term goals to long-term goals. It's I try to achieve short-term goals before because until and unless you achieve the short-term ones, you can't reach the long-term ones. Although it's a slow process, you should go after it one after the other. So hearing all of these things, I really resonated with you. And I mean, it just gave me a lot of happiness and validation that wherever I'm going is fine.
As an aside, I'm also jack of all trades, master of none. So
lovely. Feels so good today. Made my day.
there's still a role for generalists in this world, is what I'll say.
Yeah. I keep debating about this, like with a few friends of mine who believe that, you should be master of one. I'm like, no, jack of all. So yeah, now I have someone to back my claim. Cool. So I really liked how in one of your articles reflecting on change making in the public sector, you said that we celebrate funding, not delivery. We announce new stuff, not reflect on old stuff. Do you think this is because priorities and goals at times are not set, keeping in mind long-term solutions? What is your perspective?
I think it's driven by a range of patterns. One, and again, this might be more of a US context, but all of our budget cycles operate on annual cycles. And when I was in San Francisco, there was a pretty heavy push. We were trying to move to 2-year budget cycles, right? In this 1-year budget cycle, does a couple things to the public sort of priority setting process. One, a lot of energy goes into those annual budget. I mean, as soon as I used to sit in the mayor's budget office in San Francisco, and as soon as they would release the budget, they'd start planning for the next year's budget. And it's such a difficult process to allocate any new money, and there's so much negotiation that happens that it's such a focus. And in the way the media interacts with that process focuses on just like new stuff, right? Like, what are we announcing? What are we giving money to? And there's a truism that in the US people say the budget is policy, right? So where you put money is policy. It's your act and your declaration. And I actually don't agree with that truism, but I think this the process cycle around the annual budget combined with the media touch points with the annual budget process reinforce this. What are you doing? What are you giving money to right now? Not how well has that money already worked?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think in like my country, India, it's also similar. It's like an annual budget cycle that goes on. And I now look at it with a very unique perspective, like that of yours. And coming from that, like about so we have these social impact projects, and especially tech projects heavily relying on authentic data and analysis. So oftentimes the access to data and further analysis is complicated by several factors. So in your experience, how can young leaders and ensure that the data they have access to is authentic and collected through ethical means?
Yeah. Well, a couple thoughts about that. I don't have perfect answers. I think the whole sector is struggling with this, frankly. But I do have some thoughts and approaches and paths forward that we've explored and learned from. And I'll tell one from early career, and then I'll tell sort of the reality of what I've seen in the context of what are called administrative data sets, which I'll explain that. Earlier in my career, there was a big movement around the term was called like public participation GIS, and the idea was to empower communities to collect their own data. And I think that's a community-based process where you engage the community on like, what are the important things we want to collect and understand, and making the community part of that process, not only in terms of decision-making, but actual data collection. That's one model that I have seen. In the strengths of that model is that it can be very tailored and focused on the needs and perspectives and history and context of the community. Where that struggles is scaling across communities, right? And it struggles for a couple ways. Normally, those kinds of data collection projects work really well because of the particular mixture of players and people at the table. And it's sometimes this like moment in time. So that's one issue with sort of spreading that. Or the other is that it's by definition, it's bespoke. So it's hard to do comparisons, which is why we have these like larger data collection efforts. Like in the US, for example, we have something called the decennial census, which another story in another world. But our team in New Orleans actually did a lot of work on the census. And the reason why you have these large global, other than constitutional requirements is, funding formulas are made off of them. So you need a way to standardize across communities, right? And so the way that, for example, the federal government in the US tries to do that is they go through a very long planning process in between collections to hear from community experts, etc. But it is really, it's hard for that to be thoroughly representative because it's kind of who, right? And so, but you still do need these like global comparison points, like which we've seen with there's a few efforts across the I think it's the United Nations. They have a sort of like a set of standard metrics trying to get all kinds of countries to collect, right? Now those are, putting that aside, I'll jump to sort of a lot of the work I've done more recently to get at your like, how do you make sure the data is authentic? Is a lot of important data work relies on administrative data sets. And so administrative data sets are essentially like, let's say you apply to your local government for something. Maybe it's a business license. Maybe in the US, it's for food stamps. We collect data in that process. And what could we do with that data in that process? And so we, on my team, we developed a series of sort of toolkits around sort of ethical use of data, both ethical publication of data. So in New Orleans, we developed a toolkit called the Privacy Open Data Toolkit. So if we're about to release some of these administrative data sets into the public domain, what are the sort of privacy precautions, data quality pieces that we need to go through? And then also we developed an ethics and algorithms toolkit where, okay, if we're going to be using these sort of administrative data sets to develop algorithms and decision-making aids, what's the sort of rigorous analysis we need to do around not just the authenticity of the data, but any inherent bias in the data, both technical and societal bias? And so having good, thoughtful, repeatable processes is the only way that I figured out how to get out of this. And so that's why both in San Francisco, in the state of California, we developed these toolkits that we could consistently apply sort of process checks to make sure we're being good stewards of the data that we were entrusted with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially like a lot of us, we are in college right now, and a couple of us, I mean, I personally have statistics as one of the subjects, and we were really trying to figure out, how, so I'm majoring in psychology, and statistics is like an integral part of experiments. So it's like how should we collect data? How should we avoid experimental bias and so many other types of biases, right? So it really, like, I could also like, take things from what you said in my field as well. Heading on to like a question about, you also have many times advocated about how beneficial networking and building relationships are. And as Millennium Fellows who are just beginning our social impact journeys, do you have any advice for us? How should we go about networking, talking to people, and like just building on our own individual selves?
Yeah, a couple thoughts there. First and foremost, in your networking, connect with the human, not the position in the role. I've met, I'll call them hyper networkers, and it's so clear what they're trying to get out of it, right? And we're humans, we're very social creatures, right? And we can sniff that. And inauthenticity and like people who want to just meet with me because of my role, my position, and you sense it. And those are good things, but also focus on connecting with the person. And I'll flip that. So someone in my position where, often I'm the one that other people want to talk to at this stage in my career, I have maintained that focus on the person and not where they're at. No one's like too young or too inexperienced or it just, the people I've noticed who are over focused on status and whom they network with, versus like energy, capacity, connection, those relationships are brittle. So focus on more genuine connective networking than like, you know, hitting your numbers for networking. So that's one piece. The second piece is, well, I think I already said it in that kind of, that answer is that, you know, yeah, I did say this. It's just, I never turn someone away because, you know, they don't have the right pedigree or background or whatever that is. I think the other piece on networking is cultivating vulnerability. It's hard to have deep connections with folks if you don't show vulnerability and show up as a whole person. And when I was earlier in my career, I was always like to the point, right? I had to I just wanted to like dive in and like, I did all my homework on this person and asked them all these questions about who they were and da da da. And then over time, I learned to just be curious about their whole person. Like, how's your family? You know, actually, for a while, I made myself a little note card of like personal questions to ask, including of my employees. Like, how was your weekend? How is your partner doing? How is your dog? You know? And so I think cultivating that whole person connection, not just a professional connection, is helpful. And some people might disagree with that, but the reality is that hard things only happen through relationships, and the best relationships are grounded in trust. And trust forms from a basis of having a real sense of who that person is, and you don't just get through their professional life.
Makes a lot of sense. Honestly, yeah, now that I think of it, I mostly remember the people that I personally connected with, like besides just meeting them because they wanted to ask me something or if I wanted to ask them something. So yeah, it's really insightful, I think. And there are so many things that, you know, in our daily life also, like besides being Millennium Fellows, there are so many things that we keep doing. And as like we think about that also, then also it is like really relatable. One last question from my end, then I will open the floor to question from the audience. What would you say has been one of the most important learnings for you when you served as the Chief Data Officer of California?
Honestly, I'm still digesting that experience, and I actually put digestion on pause just to sort of bake in recovery. I'm on sabbatical right now. But I will say, so this is, let's call it a lesson in progress. So I talked in my opening remarks that I pointed to this career thesis, and actually my career thesis is this, which is that when I was in grad school, little context, almost everyone had a focus, right? I'm into ed policy. I'm into international relations. I'm into health policy, right? People had domain specific policy interests. And my career thesis was that if we can help the public sector be better users of data, evidence, and technology, these horizontal functions, every domain will be better. And what I am like exploring in this next phase of my career is if that thesis still holds up or if it needs some modification. And so data and evidence and technology are very important to the effective implementation of programs and policies and public sector choices and social impact. It's very, very important. Or it could be. And then sometimes it's not. So so all of that is to say is that I'm all my career theses through the lens of my lived experience in work. Sorry, did I okay.
Yeah, just broke a little bit in the bit, but got your point. Yeah. I mean, honestly, the whole conversation I mean, I'm thinking so much about my own life, so many other things as well. So I just really resonated with all of your experiences. I was just, before speaking to you a few hours ago, I was thinking about whether what I'm doing is right, wrong. So many questions I had in my head. Yeah, a lot of things seem clear now. So thank you so much for all your words. Really meant a lot. Um, Now I would open the floor to questions from the audience. Rachna, would you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Um, Good evening, Joy. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's good noon in States. Yeah. So, firstly, thank you for such an insightful session. And I was just going through your LinkedIn profile where I saw that you are a multidisciplinary thinker having specialty in data science, cyber security, policies, and yeah, privacy policies. So my question is that how does data localization affect a developing country and a developed country? And should a developed country localize data? What are its implications on the country?
And tell me, thank you for the question. Can you tell me what does data localization mean to you?
For me, it would be like just limiting the data to certain, just if there are any the foreign countries, the data would be limited to that certain area and won't go out of that. So all the data of customers and the consumers would stay inside the country and not out of it.
Got it. Got it. So sort of the mixture of both like IP protection, but also privacy and policy controls around data leaving country barriers. That's not a particular area of my expertise. So I'll sort of in general, so there's two ways to look at this, right? There's data about stuff and there's data, I mean, there's a few ways to look at this, but I'll start by saying there's data about people and there's data about stuff. And data about stuff is obviously easier, right? Because it's not as charged. Data about people and how it's used. The reason why people care about localization is because they want regulatory, rules to effectively propagate about the use of data. So let's say, GDPR in the EU, right? So GDPR is the data protection regulation in the EU, which says, okay, if you're using data on EU residents, here's what you have to do, regardless of where that company operates, including like, does that data need to stay here versus leave? And all of this, to me, the data localization, and it's essentially an ongoing, really policy conversation about what are the rights as a nation you have to control data about the people living in your country, and in control in the sense of even like, what are the privacy protections you want to afford or don't want to afford, right? In the US, we have a very long, in privacy circles, we have an ongoing conversation about how in the US, we do not have a right to privacy, right? And to the extent that data can be used to inform policies, take action on individuals, be used to regulate, incarcerate, put sanctions on, it's a very, very powerful tool. And so in some sense, data localization is an act of like, national sovereignty, right? And saying this is what you can or can't do about the people who live here. And I think what that looks like ends up being a kind of, a mixture of the local politics, the orientation, the history of the country. There's so much in that, and I think that's why we see so much variety across the world. So I don't have like a right answer. It is that sort of mixture of local or nation level, history and needs. I do think what some initiatives are trying to do, at least on the sort of social impact side of things, is have certain comparative measures across country that are abstracted from individual data. I think those are good, right? Because it helps us, you know, benchmark and strive to compare, even though you always need context for full comparisons. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough question. I mean, there's whole like think tanks dedicated to thinking about this. So I don't have a perfect answer.
Thank you for answering. It was really insightful. I'll look more on that probably. Just a little follow up that we see a lot of data lying there on dark web, and we see the advancement of AI nowadays to a lot of advancement actually after the introduction of Chat GPT and whatnot. So, so how do you see AI in uh, helping us, or in actually helping us in a way that we can use AI to connect it with data privacy, and what are its implications? Like we see this notification when we enter into Chat GPT that they can analyze our data. Whatever we ask them questions, they can analyze it to make the software better. So what all implications can AI have on our data? Would really love to hear your insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many, and we're at the beginning of it. I'll maybe sort of, I think generative AI, much like the sort of context for more standard AI, even though, you know, a few years ago it wasn't considered standard, is that in every single one of these cases, the real driver of how relevant the AI is and what it does is motivated by a decision or a product that needs to be built. So data without analysis or being put towards some choice or set of decisions, it's just data, right? And so I'll pull this out in the government context, and then I'll sort of briefly talk about like what we're seeing happening in Gen AI right now. So in the government context, you know, we've had these machine learning things, you know, tools and approaches available now for a few years, right? And I mean, you can run ML models on your laptop nowadays, right? There's just it's very much the compute possibilities are very widespread. Well, the issue we saw in the public sector around using AI, it wasn't I mean, there's definitely capacity issues, which we can have another conversation about that. It was more people opportunity spotting, where should we use AI to inform or help with decisions? It wasn't, you know, can we? It was like, it was having the right question, because you can analyze anything to death. I mean, I'm sure some of you are in some analytics classes as undergrads, and someone gives you a data set and it's like, oh, analyze it. Okay, well, that's fine. But analysis in the absence of a motivated business problem or organizational problem that you're trying to address is just like, you know, wheel turning. So I think in that's one piece. On the generative AI, I think in terms of the data, what the trend were quickly, which I mean, everyone expected this to happen, was that because a lot of the foundational models were essentially built on the internet, you know, they reflect that, right? So where we're seeing like the use and productization is going to be, I think, over time, where models are trained on private data sets, right? You know, a company will open up its data sets. So I think all of that's happening, or it's going to be happening. I think everyone's trying to figure that out right now. But we're just, you know, we're on the cusp of that with generative AI. I mean, like ChatGPT got released, what, a year ago? I think it's been a year, right? It was last November. So I think there's so many unknown questions right now, and there is a lot of like hype and talk. That being said, I think generative AI is, I rarely get on tech hype cycles, but I do think it's pretty transformational.
Yeah, I pretty much use it for a lot of things. I use it for drafting emails. So it kind of helps a lot and saves a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your answers. It was really insightful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Sayed, would you now like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you so much for such an amazing and informative session. My question is, you have talked a lot about the importance of evidence and data. What is the best and reliable way to measure the impact of my project and also document the evidence so that in the future, I will always come back to this data as accurate and reliable? Because the challenges that I am having is like, what tools or what process will I follow to measure the impact of the current project that I'm working on, so that I'll be sure that this data is reliable and accurate. Thank you.
Yeah. And so make sure to repeat back what I've heard. The question was essentially how can you how should you set about making sure you measure the impact of the work that you're doing? Well, thank you. I love that you said that. We so often launch initiatives and social impact initiatives because we know it's the right thing to do, and like we just feel it and we're excited about it. And so my advice, so there's many methodological approaches like out there. Obviously, the gold standard is an RCT if you're not familiar with that. But I think the most important thing is that you're asking the question early and you're saying, okay, if this thing we're doing is going to be successful, what is the change we should see? Okay, well, what data do we need to collect as part of this program to observe that change? And if we can't do an RCT, what are the various things we can do to sort of shore up our sort of belief in it? And that also starts with an evidence review, right? You should be, before you even decide to do an social impact thing, I've seen this many times. People are like, oh, I have this idea. I'm like, okay, well, what does the literature say about that idea? If you had that idea, someone else has had that idea. And so there's probably a whole body. So the first step whenever doing anything in social impact is see what other people did on this already that you can learn from. And then if after doing that, you decide, oh, this is how we want to proceed with our program, consciously develop an evaluation plan and as supporting that a data collection and data observation plan, and do that data gap analysis to fill it, which is, sorry, this is very like in the weeds practical guidance, but I see too many programs that they start the program, they have fuzzy ideas of the impact they'll have, but they don't actually have a data development plan to go with the program plan, right? So your program plan, what is the work we're doing, but try and have both that data development plus the program plan moving in tandem. So you're actually collecting the data. Unfortunately, I see a lot of retrospective evaluations and consultants making lots of money off of those retrospective evaluations that they actually don't really have the data because it wasn't built into the program. It was a tacked on piece. So do what you do, start planning now and thinking through it now.
Okay, thank you very much.
We had a question in chat by Stanley. Would you like to unmute and ask? Cool, I'll probably just read the question out. So the question is about how can we relate journalism and data to social impact based on what you said. So I think probably along similar lines.
Stanley, can you unpack that a little bit? Like in the sense of how can we, like, what's the role of journalism in social impact, or?
You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. I think there's some network issue on his end. So maybe we could take
I'm sorry. Okay, so I will
yeah.
reset. Okay. Hello?
Cool. I think we can take donators. Would you like to go ahead with your question? We can get back to Stanley later.
Hi, I hope you're doing well. So my question was, how can we deal with AI in relation to intellectual property, and at the same time ensure that data protection is observed? So that was my question. How can we ensure that we use AI responsibly, because we understand that AI is here to stay and it's helping in a lot of things, and it's a positive thing. But how are we going to manage it with while respecting intellectual property rights and also ensuring that data protection is observed? Thank you so much.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think anyone knows yet, right? I think I think where we're going to see experiments on is marrying these foundation models with more bespoke focused ones, where you can have tight controls around the data protection and data IP, right? That's why you're seeing like lots of corporations, they don't want their, employees dumping a bunch of data and like, OpenAI or something. So sort of relates to the earlier question around data localization and AI, because this is exactly what everyone's struggling with, and no one has a perfect answer, but that seems to be the trend, is that we're going to have these foundational models, but then we're going to have sort of closed ecosystems where you can develop more focused models on specific training data sets, where you can actually enforce the IP controls and the data protection controls. I will say, like, something that I go to lots of conferences with CDOs from both the private and public sector, and data monetization and data exchange still across corporate entities has not happened. And so given that which everyone's been talking about, data monetization, like for at least over a decade, I feel like I've been hearing these conversations, and it has never really happened because of these IP and data protection issues, which is why the obvious, like, probable trend is foundational models plus like focus smaller models in a controlled, frankly, secure data enclave environment. That's probably where we'll like see the first experiments on this, or models that are sitting on top of software, proprietary software, where the database protections are on it. I think that's where we'll see it emerge first.
Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening. Oh, it's evening in Kenya.
Rachna, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I have a little question. It's rather, I would call it rather personal, that you studied mathematics and philosophy during college as your major. So what made you pick those? Because they seem like very different domains. So what was your rationale behind picking mathematics and philosophy?
Yeah, I almost talked about this in my opening remarks, but decided not to. This was my rationale was one, when I before college, I liked everything, right? I loved my chemistry class, but I loved my literature and my English class. And I met with a campus, like a guidance counselor, who told me I lacked commitment and focus, because I was like, I just want to solve problems. Like, I had a sort of general interest even at a younger age. And so I quite intentionally picked those two areas, because philosophy, I felt like it was a great way to have a general humanities education. So instead of just focusing on lit or English or something like that, or history, I wanted like philosophy, I thought would give me that humanities grounding. And then I chose mathematics because it felt like the language of science and natural sciences. And so, like, if I understand the language, I could always branch into an area of science. And then with philosophy, I could always branch into various areas of humanities. So I wanted to essentially cover the spectrum of academia. That being said, that spectrum was sort of shaped more like a circle because philosophy and math are actually quite similar in what links them is computer science, because philosophy is essentially the art of argument, and mathematics reduces into lots of proofs. And both of those rely on logic, which is the underpinnings of comp sci.
So basically, you wanted to be a STEM girl and attaching it with the logic and ethics and all that we study in philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think about thinking, but then fed by action. And I think that's something throughout my career. I've tried to blend theory with practice, because theory without practice is just hand waving and pontification. But that's why my theories are always fed by implementation and having to do the work. And when you have to do the work, you inform the theory. And, you know, at its heart, I think part of my now mission is just to try and make these institutions work a little bit better than what I found when I started.
Amazing. Just a little follow-up. So like you mentioned about philosophy and thinking. So what's your take on the ship of Theseus dilemma?
The what? You know, I actually don't have a take on it. Do folks know what she's talking about? So the idea is that if you take a ship and you replace every plank such that over time, all the planks, none of them are the original planks, is it still the same ship, right? And I guess this falls into the, I am less interested in sort of theocratic questions like that. They've never been as interesting to me as, like, you know, like by theocrat, like, is there a God? You know, what does it all mean? None of that stuff has been as interesting to me as like understanding how societies and institutions. So I don't have a take on that one, but if it's maybe a better answer is that every morning I read a mixture of Buddhism, Taoism, Stoicism, Western sort of like psychology, and I actually just read poetry. So I read a little mixture of that every morning, and that kind of keeps my brain, you know,
healthy
inspired.
as new.
What's that?
Healthy as new.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thank you so much for the insights. I could relate to the stoicism thing. I also I am into it and trying to embrace it. So yeah, kudos to that. Thank you.
This is what I'll say on stoicism. It's not enough. Like, that's why I read Buddhism and Taoism and psychology and poetry, because stoicism, it's got a very particular, I would say, heavily Western thinking to it, that I think is deeply flawed in some cases. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to pitch in, because in the end, yeah, because when you were talking about how you were doing philosophy and math, so like it's not just about like how your principles that I relate to, it's also about how, like, I'm trying to do a minor in math with a major in psychology. So it's like it's so similar, and it's like so like something that I can resonate to. So it was really amazing, like for me personally, like engaging with you, because there were so many ways in which I could personally connect with you. So do you have any closing remarks for our Millennium Fellows?
I think just, you know, you're at a fascinating point in your career. You're probably all a bit type A, given that you're in this. But I would say just my closing remarks is, don't take your work seriously, but don't take it to the point where it's painful or no longer fun or becomes you know, I've sometimes found myself in toxic work situations. even if you really believe in the purpose and what you're doing, sometimes you just have to move on to your next thing. So just stay in touch with your humanity and your connection with others as you do your change work, and you'll be okay. And you know, you'll be able to survive or get through most anything. And so don't try not to stress too much. I'm actually reading a book on unwinding anxiety right now, and like how to, like, you know, systematically avoid, you know, chronic anxiety. But just remember that the world is a big place, the universe is vast, and we're all just kind of figuring it out and stumbling along the way. And so be kind to yourself as you stumble and have moments of rapture.
Cool. And we would love to connect with you. So can you share some social media handle that you can share with all of our audience in chat, like maybe your email, your LinkedIn, or whatever that you're comfortable with sharing on Zoom?
Sure. Oh, and then I do have like a book recommendation on career stuff, but I'm not a big fan of follow your passion. What does that mean? But I'm including all my things here. I am on Twitter, I guess but I'm not frankly active, and then I'll put my Medium in here.
Perfect. Until you do that,
I'm going to link to a specific blog post in Medium, because I think it might be helpful at this stage of your careers.
thank you so much for that. I think you'll be flooded with all of our emails now. It was lovely to connect with you again. For all the Millennium Fellows, we have 2 webinars that are coming up soon. Just keep an eye on your email. This Saturday, we have our 5th SDG conversation hour. So be prepared. Over to Grace.
Thank you so much, Queen Asha. Thank you so much, Joy, for making this very insightful. I really enjoyed everything you shared, and I hope all the fellows also enjoyed the insights, the tips on how to manage a career, how to manage your own life, and just being able to stay awake in what you're doing with life, and just making sure that you're in control of what's happening around you. Thank you so much. We look forward to more interactions. We look forward to seeing you again in another webinar, another year. And to the other fellows, thanks for making the time. I wish you all a good rest of your day, evening, night, and bye to everyone. You can feel free to hop off now. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Queen Asha.
Thank you, and thank you, MCN and the United Nations Academic Impact for launching the Millennium Fellowship.
Thank you. Thank you for supporting us in every way.
Thank you. Please take care. Bye-bye.